Hi, John. This is Russ Blackburn. I would.
Hi, is it just the two of
It
us?
is just the two of us, yeah. And first, I've been reading. We do a clipping service every day, and Melissa, who clips the news articles, has been. I've been noticing you covering items in really well. So, thank you
Oh,
for
thank you.
doing that. As as media has shrunk, there was a time when everybody used to complain about the media and, they never cover what we want them to, or they're always here when we don't want them to be.
Right.
You know, now that we have very few reporters that are working for the print media, I think there's a real niche for folks who kind of aggregate and take sources from everywhere and share them with the world. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. It's nice to meet you, if not in person.
So John, what I'd like to do is just kind of give an overview, and I do have a few slides that will help me with talking points. At the end, what I would like to do is I want to go through these slides, and then I'll turn the PowerPoint off, and I'll be able to see you, and you'll be able to see me, and then answer your questions. So I'll kind of give a big, broader overview of the budget, and then my PowerPoint slides, which are available. You can use those if needed to help tell your story as well.
Okay, great.
So to start out with, this is one of those very difficult years to prepare a budget. We have a global pandemic. We know that we were closed down in Port St. Lucie, in Florida, in the nation, to try to slow the spread of COVID. Certainly helped while we were closed down, not so much the last 6 weeks, but it made it very difficult because we're definitely impacted by consumption. Sales tax is one of the revenue sources. It's really the prime revenue source for the state of Florida, and we are impacted by sales tax as well. So when Disney and Universal close, we will lose revenue. But that's not our prime source of revenue. Our major source of revenue is ad valorem property taxes. And one of the vagaries of local government, both cities and counties, is that your ad valorem tax, which is a little bit less than 50% of our total revenue for the general fund, it follows a year in arrears. So January 1 of 2020, that's when the property appraiser sets the values for our community. And of course, those are based on sales that occurred all in 2019. So what we see for our main revenue source, even though there's a lot of uncertainty, is that our main revenue source grew substantially, grew by, and I'll go through this a little more in detail, but 9.5%. So while you have this uncertainty in one area of your local government, we're actually benefiting from all the sales and the changes in value and the new homes and businesses that were constructed in 2019. So what I'd like to do is help kind of paint the picture of what does that do to a city government that has to provide services? How do we act responsibly as we balance our revenue sources? So if you look at our budget, our total budget went up 18.7%. So our budget for Port St. Lucie is $536,439,000. But that 18%, there's a story behind it. We have several major capital projects that are being funded this year. Those funds previously were in reserves, and now they're moved into the budget as an appropriation to spend. So a couple of those are examples. We have a large utility project expansion that's almost, I think it's $43 million. And then we have a project that it's really a Florida Department of Transportation project, but because of their funding issues, we agreed to basically advance the funding for Port St. Lucie Boulevard South phases 2.1 and ultimately 2.2 so that could move forward. Well, to advance that funding, we had to move out of our undesignated reserve around $11 million. So that one expenditure that now moves into an expenditure category that's 10% of our general fund. And so our budget's up in total, our general fund budget are up, but both of those increases are driven primarily by, somewhat by the increase in assessed valuations, but mostly by the allocation of funding to these big capital projects. So we've had the money, the monies have been in our reserves, which are not appropriated. Then when you appropriate them, then they now, go as a check mark against the budget. So I mentioned earlier that our tax base has increased. I don't know if you've driven around Port St. Lucie very much, but tremendous growth in the Tradition area, Southern Grove. I think we have all of the major national home builders now building in Port St. Lucie. Coulter Homes, Pulte Homes, Mattamy, GL, which is building Riverland. They're all active in Port St. Lucie, and so we've had a lot of homes being built. Last year, we issued around a little bit under 3,000 new single-family permits. In addition, we have homes being built on scattered lot sites throughout the city. So the increase in the assessed base comes from major two things: new construction, which I just described, but also as properties become more valuable, when they sell, those properties go on the tax roll at a closer level to their value from their appraisal or the fair value that the property appraisers set on them. So that's how we ended up, and we're very pleased to have a 9.5% increase in our assessed base. Very few cities and counties in Florida have that kind of increase, and it really shows Port St. Lucie is kind of leading the state in many ways, but one of them is we were prepared for the growth. We have really very good quality growth occurring in our community. Our infrastructure is already in place, and we're also seeing the vacant lots that have been around for many years. There's a real demand for those lots now. So on your tax bill, if you're a Port St. Lucie resident, you'll see your general fund tax, and you'll also see there's a voter-approved debt. So the citizens of Port St. Lucie voted by a margin of 89 to 11 to tax themselves to build the Crosstown Parkway. We opened last June, had a great celebration, one of the proudest moments for all of our citizens. We have a bond that pays for the Crosstown Parkway, and that bond requires debt service to pay it each year. Because of the increases in values in the community, we actually can lower the debt service payment, or lower the actual millage that's attached to Crosstown, and we are proposing to reduce that millage by 1/10 of a mil. So it goes down by 1/10 of a mil. Our operating millage, we are also proposing to reduce. We did have an increase in valuation for real property, but that's being offset by a projected decrease in state shared revenues. Those are revenues that it's a mixture of consumption type taxes, alcohol, cigarettes, sales tax that's shared with the local governments in order to help pay for services that maybe the state would have to provide and to keep the quality of services up for local governments. So we balance the growth in the ad valorem tax base with this reduction, which is around an 18% reduction in state shared revenues that are projected. And we have about a 2.5% overall increase in revenues for our ad valorem. But this allows us to reduce our millage. We are recommending to the city council that the millage for the general fund that supports the general fund be reduced by 1/20th of a mil, 0.05. And so when you add that to the 1/10th of a mil reduction for the Crosstown Parkway, we are proposing a total millage rate reduction for Port St. Lucie of 0.15 mils. So it's always good to look back, and we have a couple of slides that will help you kind of look and see where the city's been and hopefully where we're going. So if we go back to fiscal year 15-16, our millage was around 6.70 mils, aggregate millage. Now we're down. The city's operating millage will now be about 0.0047, and our total aggregate millage now comes in at about 5.92 mils. And if you look at that chart, it's a nice reduction and a nice trend line in the overall millage. So over the last 5 years, we've had about 0.7 of a mil reduction in the city's aggregate millage rate. So we looked at, okay, what does this mean if you're a property owner? You're aware that Florida has homestead exemption. So somebody buying a new house today, moving into state, they're going to be taxed at pretty close to what they paid for the house. But in order to make sure that people don't get priced out of their homes over time as values increase, the state has a homestead exemption program, and that first reduces your value that you're taxed on by $50,000, and then it also puts a cap on your growth in valuation of 3% a year. If you take an average house, which is valued at $240,000 in Port St. Lucie, you apply the tax rate for the city that will be proposed. That average property tax owner, it's a median value, they'll receive an increase in their total tax bill of $4.27. That is less than 1%. So a very small increase. As I think most residents and observers would know, our costs go up like everybody else, like everybody's household. We use electricity, we have to buy, we pay employees, we have to buy operating supplies, and particularly our homesteaded property owners really benefit from the growth that has occurred in the community, allowing us to have a very small increase in total tax bill of $4.27. So we have several major revenue sources and particularly for those services that really can support themselves. We have a separate fee, separate from the real property tax, because they're direct beneficiaries for that fee. And so one of our fees is the stormwater fee. It's used to provide water quality, to cleanse water before it goes out into receiving bodies, and particularly into the North Fork of the St. Lucie River. And it is proposed to be flat this year, to stay the same for our stormwater fee. The other fees that we charge are for water and sewer. And just like in your home, we have experienced increases in our personnel, increases in our cost to buy chemicals, increases in the plant cost to run and operate our plants. It is proposed that our water and sewer rates increase by 1.5%. That is less than the Southeast Regional CPI. So it's less than CPI, but it does allow us to keep a very good stormwater, or very good water and sewer system, make the repairs when necessary, but a very small increase. So I guess about 2.5 years ago, the city was presented with an opportunity. The Tradition Land developer that was owned by an international insurance company had sold all the residential property that they controlled, and looked at the city's job corridor that had historically been our hope for a job base in Port St. Lucie. And they approached the city and said, yeah, we're making a business decision that we're going to stop paying our taxes on Southern Grove. And you, city, if you want to, we'll transfer this to you at no cost. And so you would have, you would be able to own and control the Southern Grove Jobs Corridor. Ultimately, we negotiated with them, and they actually paid us $1 million to take Southern Grove. That helped us pay the taxes and the CDDs and the SADs that are levied on Southern Grove. And we thought that was so important for the long-term future of the city, to be able to control where businesses grow in Port St. Lucie, how we can create jobs, that the council ultimately made the decision to accept the Southern Grove Jobs Corridor, approximately 1,200 acres of land. So when we started that first year out of the gate, we had taxes and special assessments and a little bit in community development district expenditures that totaled about $4.2 million. Since then, we've sold property in Southern Grove. The city, as the master developer, is being very successful. We have a number of letters of intent. We are negotiating final negotiations for at least 2 big purchase and sale agreements, and that amount that's required to pay the special assessments and the taxes for FY21 is projected at $3.9 million, and we are making really good progress in divesting of other parcels there, and that number is going to come down rapidly. But it is it's a very positive story that we brought the Southern Grove debt and tax payments down. It's not gone away yet, but we are making very positive efforts. So one of the biggest stories from Port St. Lucie for the last 4 years, 5 years, is that we have reduced our total indebtedness. So in 2010, the city owed for all of our debt and $1,400,000 or $400 million. No, $40 million. $1,040 million. Since then, we have not issued any new debt. We have refinanced existing debt, and we've continued to pay our bills. Every year, we've been reducing the total debt by around $700 million. And for FY21, our total debt now is projected at $721 million. That is a 26.5% reduction in debt in the last 11 years. We're very proud of that trend line that you see on that slide. It really speaks to the discipline of the city council, of sticking to it, setting a goal, and saying we're going to reduce the city's debt. Well, I believe from what I've seen that we're now below a little bit probably the average debt of cities our size that don't have electric utilities. So we've really made a very positive impact there. So Port St. Lucie, like every city in the state, is mostly people. We deliver services, and as such, that's a big chunk of our expenditures. Typically runs between 60 and 70% of a general fund budget. So for Port St. Lucie, we've seen very positive population growth over the years. We've been averaging between 4,500 and 5,000 new residents every year. That number's going up. And one of the big indicators of how efficient a city government is the employees per 1,000 residents. So in 2008, when the Great Recession began, we had about 7.3 employees per 1,000 residents. In 2009, that peaked at about 8.1 employees per 1,000. The Great Recession hit Port St. Lucie pretty hard. We dropped down to around 6 employees per 1,000. That has still continued a little bit of a downward trend, but very stable now at around 5.8 employees per 1,000. It shows that even though we've had very significant growth, even though standards have changed, requirements have changed, needs have changed in the community, we've kept up with those needs without increasing that ratio of employees per 1,000 residents. And you see on that chart, it's a longitudinal chart that shows how we peaked in 08 and 09, and we dropped down, and we have been flat ever since we dropped down, basically, comparing the number of employees to each 1,000 residents. So we do have some recommended positions in the budget. The general fund is the main fund for those positions, those services where you really can't charge a fee. As much as we might like to, sometimes it's hard to charge a fee to have a police officer just driving through your neighborhood. We do a lot of code enforcement to make sure that our city is clean, that people take care of their properties. It's hard to say, let's all chip in and pay for that, because most people do take care of their properties. Most people do keep their property clean. So it's hard to segregate out as a fee. So those are the kind of things that are included in your general fund. We are recommending, and our one of the city council's #1 strategic objectives was to establish a new policing district in the Southern Grove area. And so because that's almost 30 full-time equivalents, the council set a goal of establishing that new district over 5 years. So for each of the 5 years, and we're now in year 3, we're adding patrol officers. We also had some specific needs within police. And we are adding a gang unit as we're seeing some gang activity increases and also narcotics. And the gang unit will help us to thwart that growth in Port St. Lucie. The gang unit is funded by a grant from the federal government. So the federal government is helping us pay for that unit, and that service increase. It's a 3-year grant that pays approximately 40% of the 4 members that are part of the gang unit. So this is year 3 of our effort moving toward a District 5 police district. And we are basically taking the positions that we add and we'll distribute them in high call volume areas. And then at some point in the 5th year, we'll divide our districts and create a new one and pull people out of each of those other districts so that we now have comprised the full district. We have within our building fund, which is funded totally by building permit fees, we're actually seeing increases in building permits. We're continuing to see increases in new home construction. And one of the challenges that we have as a city is keeping up, making sure we keep that level of service high. And so we are adding 5 full-time equivalents within our building department. And within our utility, which continues to grow and continues to hook people up for new construction, as well as hooking up property owners who may be on septic or well and bring them onto our system. We're adding 10 full-time equivalents. So there are some new positions within our organization, but still, if you go back to that employees per 1,000, you barely see the movement in the line for 26 total FTEs, of which out of those 26, about 15 are funded by the enterprise funds, the building department or the utility fund. So a star of Port St. Lucie's budget in fiscal year 21 is our capital projects. So I mentioned the city's strategic plan, and several of the projects that are in the strategic plan relate to capital projects. So our number 1 projects are the District 5 Police District and funding the staffing. And number 2, or another number 1, is what's now called the port, building out the park project that's located on Westmoreland, going up to the Port St. Lucie Boulevard Bridge. So we have a 5-year project. We're starting to make substantial improvements to the port. This year, for fiscal year 20, we built the Port Boardwalk. And if you go down Port St. Lucie Boulevard, you'll see the boardwalk. Really, really nice. Ultimately, it'll be a 1-mile-long section of boardwalk up and back. Really substantial improvement in the infrastructure and the attractors in Port St. Lucie. But this year, we'll also be doing the site work for the port. The elevations have to be changed because of floodplain issues. And then we'll be preparing the pad for a waterfront restaurant. We'll continue with implementing our 10-year sidewalk plan, which actually will be built out in 10 years. Our 10-year street resurfacing, which resurfaces all of our identified needs over a 10-year period. We are advance funding the Port St. Lucie Boulevard South sections 2.1 and 2.2. The FDOT will reimburse the city for those expenditures, but it will be once the projects are complete. So those are some big projects, and then we're making major investments in our water and wastewater treatment plants. these are the hidden services that as the city grows, you have to continuously improve. Another project that we're in the process currently of doing the master planning, and we're actually are setting up virtual town halls to get public feedback on the adventure park. This will be located at Crosstown Parkway in Cameo. And we will have biking, skateboard park, other elements of what we call an adventure park to give our citizens different things to do in a great community. So those are the major kind of talking points. So now I'm going, John, to actually stare at you and let you look at me too. So I want to open it up to your questions. They say this is, can you hear me, John? Maybe I needed to be muted on.
Yeah, I could hear you fine before, so whatever you just did made it worse.
All right. Thank you, Abby. All right. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Abby's the hidden hand, so he comes in and saves us when we're messing up on Zoom. So,
well, let me just start by saying it's been a long time since I lived in Port St. Lucie. I used to live in the off of actually east of US 1, where Port St. Lucie Boulevard is, and there's a lot of growth since then. So
yes.
I see everything. I haven't even actually been to the city hall where I'm assuming you're now sitting. I haven't been to the new city hall. That's how long ago it's been since I ran in that neck of the woods. So I think you did a terrific job of explaining everything. It's a lot to wrap my head around, of course, but yes, providing you share that PowerPoint with me, I can, it serves as a really good blueprint for looking ahead. The obvious question, of course, which I'm sure you're already anticipating, is what about COVID? What's going to happen? How and in what ways is all of this going to be affected by COVID? And I know that's an open-ended question in a lot of areas that you just don't have answers for now. But I'm maybe what you should do is just sort of tell me about how you're going to sort of plan for it or analyze it or unpack the effects of it moving forward.
Yeah. So I mentioned that one of the unusual things about local government is that our main revenue stream, which is the ad valorem tax, is in arrears. So that tax base was set in January 2020. And so that's a big part of our FY21 budget and the revenues. But we do anticipate that we will see a reduction in state shared revenues. That fund totals about, I think it's between 11 and $12 million. And we've anticipated a reduction in state shared revenues of around 18%. So that juxtaposed against the growth in ad valorem still ends up with an increase in total revenues for the city. So for fiscal year 21, we still see strong revenues. We have growth. Our population growth has not stopped. And indeed, almost every day we're continuing to set records for number of building permits pulled, number of inspections that our building department is engaged with. So what we're mostly concerned about is looking beyond the next fiscal year. We're really thinking, how do we position the city for FY22? This is we budget annually, but we know that if there is a deeper or prolonged recession, that FY22 and even 23 are more likely to be impacted by revenues, and just because of we have the exposure of if property values should drop or if sales and consumption uses should decline or decline further. So that's our unknown. We don't think we will be able to, anybody will really be able to tell you answers until after the first of the year. So we're preparing a budget in June to be reviewed and debated in July. We won't really know the answer to some of the questions that a lot of people have until at least after the first quarter of FY21. I think we'll start having a little sense then. We'll certainly know at that time what is our ad valorem base for FY22. What's the trend on the consumption-based revenues that the city also benefits from? So, but until then, we only have the information that we have, and it would say things look pretty good relatively. We know there's a danger out there. We know that there certainly, with the closure of the state FY20, we had a reduction in revenue the current fiscal year, but we can only hope, like everybody else, that by October, when this budget kicks off, it's starting to sort out. People are back at work. They're beginning to spend money again, and that's really going to be our fiscal year 21. And then we're always looking ahead to where do we think we'll be in 22. But generally, it's I would say a cautious budget. We want to make sure that we are not overspending, adding a lot of new employees, even though they may be justified because of the growth that we're seeing. That we know we have to pay for them not only this fiscal year, but into the future. We don't hire people one year and then say, oh, well, we'll just lay them off the next year. We try to smooth out our organization, try to be responsible. And so we are adding some law enforcement personnel that are needed based on the growth that we've experienced. But otherwise, we're keeping a pretty tight rein on, let's make sure we don't put ourselves in a hole for FY22.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, I don't think I have any other questions at the moment. I may, as I dig a little deeper into this, I may have a question or two, but like I said, I think you laid it out pretty well and presented it in a very understandable fashion. So I appreciate that, because I was a reporter, but 25 years ago, so everything has changed. Yes. Everything is different. So I've been with Nowhere News since March, and catching up to the new world. So it's an interesting time, that's for sure.
So this PowerPoint is online. We'll make sure you get it, and then also our whole entire budget is online right now. I think it should be up now, and we're making some final tweaks to make sure that everything is handicap accessible. I think it's a PDF now, and we'll change it in the next week or so to make sure. Okay, so very accessible. So it's about 400 pages or so. So fun read. It will put you to sleep. 600 pages. I'm sorry, I was corrected, John. 600 pages.
Oh boy.
Yeah, but if you read the budget in brief, and you'll know everything you really need to know.
All right, very good.
All right, thank you. Hey, thanks for taking the time to participate with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, John.